flexibility in the application of the law. And they began to enact a series of regulations, not legislation, but regulations within the Fish and Wildlife Service that lifted and addressed many of these problems, that made it much easier for working landowners to deal with the Endangered Species Act. Thank God. And that mentality, that sea change, if you will, continues to this day.
Can you give us an example of the kind of top-down regulation or implementation of the Endangered Species Act, which prior to the Clinton era would have been particularly difficult for people to implement on the ground, which, as a result of the change in attitude he brought about, became more flexible and easier to deal with?
Mm-hmm. And you're asking? I'm
asking if there's a particular example, because I understand that a lot of ranchers or landowners or industrial interests by default are likely going to say that they just can't, certainly in this day and age, maybe not so much back 30, 40 years ago, are going to say that we can't do this is too much of an imposition on us, and that may or may not be the case. What I'm trying to find out and get at is in an example of something that perhaps the well-intended was truly onerous in terms of being able to implement it, and a specific example of how the Clinton administration turned that around in a way that, mm-hmm. one, both reflected the spirit of the law, and two, made it easier for folks to actually deal with it and process.
Yes, good question. Let me think of a good example. There are a lot of examples out there.
Sure.
Let me pick the cow, the cattle.
Yeah.
Beef cattle. They graze to a large extent in the West on federal forest land and public lands, BLM lands, mm-hmm. as well. And the law was very stringent in terms of limiting how much grazing could be done on what I'll call the public estate.
Right.
And there was a breath of fresh air when that was relaxed, and the grazing permits were annually renewed with a far easier microscope than they had been in the past with the federal government.
Okay,
and that's just one example.
And in that example, did that still allow the law, in your opinion, to be implemented in such a way that it was still serving its purpose rather than just being circumvented for the benefit of business interests?
No, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been very good in balancing the interests and the needs of what I'll call our commercial sector, mm-hmm. Especially our agriculture sector,
right?
With the rigidity of the act, if you will, and the intent of the act. They've been pretty good in balancing those two.
Okay. What, in your opinion, have been the biggest successes overall of the Endangered Species Act? Where has it moved the environment in a positive direction where that was not the case in 1973?
Sure. There are it varies from week to week, but there are about 1,680 some species listed as either threatened or endangered. And that's roughly 40% wildlife and 60% plants. There are about 680 some species that are listed. About 60% of those are plants, and the other, when I say plants, I also mean plants and insects, and so forth. And the 40% are animals and aquatic species. Now, if those 1,680 some species had not been protected by the law, they would be probably gone or primarily gone and no longer existed today. They would have become extinct. That is the greatest success. Now, the naysayers want to say, well, my golly, you've only delisted 40 or 50 species. Why haven't you done a better job? Well, it's taken longer for everyone to realize that it takes a long time to rehabilitate certain species that were in crisis. So the naysayers always want to point to the fact that there'd just be few delistings. But what you have to look at really is the positive side of it. How many have been protected and are still protected because of the law? There would be 1,680 some species that have not gone extinct.
Have there been adaptations or amendments to the law or changes in approach to enforcement of the law that have better taken into account how long a time it does take to rehabilitate a species?
Yes. There have been only three, well, there have been several amendments to the law, but there have been only three major amendments. Okay. The last one is in 1988, interestingly enough, before Clinton took office and Bruce Babbitt became Secretary of Interior. Now, what they realized is that they had to loosen up, and they could only do it through regulation. They recognized that it took Congress forever to enact a law or change a law. And it's even got more polarized more today than it did then. But they recognized it just was ineffective to rely on Congress to provide the relief that landowners needed. So what they began to do is regulate the law. When it was passed in 1973, the law was 20 pages long, and the regulations were only 50 pages. 20 and 50. Wow. Today, the law is 50 pages long, and the regulations are 5,000 pages. 5,000. Wow. And those 5,000 pages were created to loosen up and make it a lot easier for landowners to live with the law and begin to recognize that through funding provided by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the programs at the Department of Agriculture, that they could live with the law and actually improve their bottom line.
How do you believe we can make sure the Endangered Species Act continues to be a force for environmental preservation into the future?
The universe, the planet, is a very resilient planet, and it heals itself, notwithstanding man's destruction of many parts of the planet through overforesting, overgrazing, mining, and the like. Okay. Man's destructive nature can lead to man's ultimate demise because the earth will react, and it does react. We've seen it with the volcanoes and erupting and the lava flows, just as one example, or with climate change, which is a big issue, a major issue that has really exacerbated the pressure on the Endangered Species Act. And we need to look at man's conduct and try to get it under better control than it has been in the past, as they continue to, how shall I say it, pollute, destroy, and poison the earth with chemicals, right, wastes, and other forms of degradation. The earth is a very special place, which our indigenous people have always recognized. and we need to recognize it as well.
Yeah, and we need to remember that it's all of our our homes, and if we mess it up,
That's right.
We're messing up our own backyards, and
that's right.
We forget that at our peril.
Few people really recognize this dilemma that we're facing, called a biodiversity crisis.
Yeah.
And the biodiversity crisis is exacerbated by climate change. But right in the middle of all of that is the Endangered Species Act, which is designed to stop degradation and stop species from being extinguished. But even today, notwithstanding that act being around for 50 years, they are being extinguished and more today than they were 50 years ago. It's continuing to accelerate.
And it's another important tool that we have to make sure that as we face greater and greater environmental challenges, our ecosystem remains as balanced as is possible. And let's hope that the next 50 years see the act remain just as strong. We've been speaking with Lowell Baier. He is the author of the Codex of the Endangered Species Act, the First 50 Years, Volume 1. Mr. Baier, thanks so much for being with us today on Facepalm America.
Well, may I mention that Volume 2 deals with the next 50 years.
Well, and hopefully that will serve as a guidebook to future generations, so that they can maintain the same or even greater standards to maintain our environment.
And Volume 3 will be released. Volume 2 comes out this week, and Volume 3 will be released on Earth Day, April 22nd of next year. So
Well,
I'll
fantastic.
talk to you then.
I look forward to it. Lowell Baier,
Okay.
Thanks so much for being on Facepalm America. All the best to you. I want to thank Ace Elson and Rosabelle Hine for producing this program. You can go again to facepalmamerica.com for past episodes, engaging with us on social media, and you can call or message us at 202-656-6271. Please share this episode with a friend. Let them know that it is something worth listening to that will grow our program. And until next time, enjoy the day.